Okay, now we've got Jake Rockatansky, Julian Feeld, and Travis View, the hosts of the Qanon Anonymous podcast. Thank you guys for coming on.
Thanks for having us.
So first off, I feel every day like I'm down some horrific rabbit hole, but I think that the rabbit hole that you guys are in is just way deeper. So first, let's get this part out of the way, and that is what QAnon is, because when we hear about QAnon, we meaning regular people, like the layman out here, it's that there's this, satanic cabal of Democrats operating a global child sex trafficking ring, all conspiring against Donald Trump. How much more than that is it?
So originally, QAnon appeared on the 4chan image board, and actually the concept of Anon just comes from any poster that would post on these anonymous platforms would have Anonymous as their name. And so a variety of different people were essentially role-playing as people with insider information. And QAnon was just one of them. He went by Q or Q Clearance Patriot, didn't even use the term Q at the beginning, or didn't sign his posts. And very quickly, I think a combination of people on those boards who were maybe ironically boosting this, and people who were really starting to believe it, started to spread the idea that this person was actually a highly placed military source inside the Trump administration. Mm-hmm. And he was giving secret information about what Trump was actually going to do behind the scenes to take care of what they perceived as, yes, a cabal of pedophiles, specifically child traffickers, and a kind of satanic group of politicians that had, for maybe hundreds of years tried to control the population. So it was kind of Alex Jones if he were pretending to be inside, the Trump administration. And very quickly, promises started coming out about this event called the Storm, which would be the rounding up of all of these, bad people and their punishment. So the idea is he's sending them to Guantanamo. Maybe there's going to be military tribunals, possibly even executions. And all of this was occurring at a time where Trump was not necessarily coming through on some of the promises, certainly not some of the more extreme promises that he had made during, his campaign and the first year of his presidency. And so this really started to create a brush fire of beliefs. So very quickly, this was taken up by YouTubers who wanted to red pill the normies, as they see it, kind of awaken them to this great awakening that they perceived. And this was the kind of introduction to a generation that maybe wasn't tech savvy enough to be on the Chan image board, so 4chan and then later 8chan. So this led to the spread of the belief system among people who maybe weren't as tech savvy, who maybe wouldn't be able to log in on 4chan or 8chan, but they were capable of watching YouTube videos. They were on Facebook. They were on these bigger social media platforms. And there was these kind of intermediaries, or as they called themselves, bakers, who would take these cryptic posts by Q and would repost them through aggregators that were accessible, on easy to find websites, and would talk about them and decode them on YouTube. They would explain what was happening on the chans, which was the work of essentially decrypting these very strange drops, as they started to be called. And so very quickly, a group of influencers kind of stepped in and started to spread this among the normies. The normies started spreading these memes on their own social media platforms, and it became a whole movement, within the kind of MAGA fervor of Donald Trump's first year. And conveniently, of course, it explained that a lot of these bloodthirsty wishes that these people have about their enemies and what's going to happen and the justice that's coming, it promised those things were actually happening behind the scenes, which is, I think, a kind of alluring idea for people who've been waiting for politicians to do what they say they're going to do. Now, in this case, of course, it was essentially executions, rounding up your enemies, and revealing, declassifying information about a variety of different conspiracy theories. So anything from aliens to JFK's assassination.
I have 100 questions, but I want to start with this, and this is what's given me the most trouble. If this thing is all predicated on Q, if this is all predicated on this idea that they're fighting back against a cabal of child sex traffickers, how do they reconcile the fact that Donald Trump has history with someone like Jeffrey Epstein, or that you have a guy like Matt Gaetz who's under investigation by the FBI for child sex trafficking? Like, so much of what this entire movement is based upon, the people who these QAnon adherents champion are the ones mixed up in exactly the stuff that they purport to be fighting against.
Yes, I think that is kind of the point of the movement, is to create a kind of cognitive dissonance where you're able to selectively target the people that you think are in charge of it. Having said that, there is a kind of both sides element to this, in that they, much like Alex Jones, they hated George Bush, and they actually worshipped JFK and JFK Jr., who they were later grew part of them later grew convinced was actually coming back and was going to run with Trump in 2024. So it's a complex movement, but it's definitely one that, as far as modern politicians, and certainly as far as the 2016 election and onwards, very much targeted Democrats and anyone on the right that they thought were enabling this, kind of agenda that they were putting in, this mind control agenda.
And there's also, within the QAnon ideology, there's kind of a closed loop way of thinking that Q encourages, based on certain drops, not to trust the mainstream media, that when somebody attacks somebody for something, it means that they're actually projecting, and they're accusing, your heroes of the very thing that they are doing behind the shadows. So, even though information comes out, of Trump's relationship with Epstein, there is built-in mechanisms within the QAnon beliefs that people can say, oh, but what Trump was doing was actually hunting him. Trump was setting him up to take him down. He was pretending to be friends with Jeffrey Epstein so he could get all of the dirt on Bill and Hillary Clinton. It's
all just like built in, like heads we win, tails you lose. There's always a convenient way to explain away everything.
Absolutely.
In fact, there's the perfect thought terminating cliche that became kind of part of their catalog of them was think mirror, as in what you see is the exact opposite of what is actually happening.
Right. So they can be accused of everything from here until the end of the earth, and it'll never actually stick to them because, it's not me, it's you.
Like Matt Gaetz was supposed to be a deep state operation to take him out. It's not that he's actually one of the people that they would normally within their belief system put on the list of people they hate, right?
Right. How convenient. I guess the question here is, like, why did you guys start this podcast? You've done around 400 episodes now. You've been featured everywhere. I'm pretty sure you're the foremost experts on QAnon. Why subject yourselves to something like this?
I think all of us came at it from a different perspective. I mean, I was certainly interested in the post-truth era that we were shifting into and the kind of spectacle of American politics. Jake had a history with conspiracy theories that he enjoyed, and he watched them slowly get polluted by anti-Semitism, satanic panic. And obviously there were elements of that maybe along the way, but there used to be, a form of relatively harmless conspiracism that existed, through things like Art Bell's Coast to Coast and, Above Top Secret, websites like that.
Yeah, what happened to me was I was our conspiracy lurker. I loved reading about aliens and ghosts and Loch Ness Monster and that sort of stuff. And what I noticed was that slowly, around the end of 2017, that the posts in our conspiracy were more and more frequently about this poster named Q, and to be perfectly honest, I was kind of into it, as somebody that I would categorize myself as pretty progressive person. And so the idea that there was corruption within the the federal law enforcement level, I was open to that idea. And what happened was when the QAnon board on Reddit got banned. I followed them over to another platform called Vote, and Vote is basically like a fake Reddit. It's very similar, very similar user flow, but it's all anonymous. And so I went over to see, okay, well, now that these people aren't attached to an email address or they're not attached to a username, what are they really saying? And I would say nine out of 10 posts were about Jews. And, they would say the real truth about Jews, or it's time we can finally talk about the Jews. And as a Jewish person myself, I had, it was like the end of an M. Night Shyamalan movie. All of a sudden, everything kind of, whirled into perspective. And I went, oh my God, what these guys are doing are just perpetuating the same old conspiracy theories that the New World Order and the Jews, the evil Jews run the world. And it's just packaged in this very modern, for the internet age sort of medium.
And Travis came more from a background of,
well, Travis, you can.
Yeah, rationalism and debunking. So tell us a bit about that.
Yeah, I really came from I had a previous interest in young Earth creationism and intelligent design and these sorts of nonsense that a lot of, basically like right-wing people tried to push into public schools unsuccessfully, thankfully. I was also very online as a consequence of my day job. I worked in digital marketing. And I didn't really think much of QAnon because it was just another weird sort of Chan thing until I noticed that it started to be promoted by Charlie Kirk, who was, a pretty major conservative figure. I noticed that Charlie Kirk started boosting these bogus stats that came straight from QAnon. That's when I realized that it wasn't something that was going to, stay in the bowels of the internet. It's something that was going to be amplified by the highest realms of conservative media.
Has any part of this been scary or dangerous for you? Because, you've basically been exposing the truth about a subset of the population that already has a proclivity to act in a way that's not necessarily rational, right? And personally, I know the steps that I've had to take to keep myself safe in this digital world. Like, has that been an issue for you? Have you dealt with threats or violence or anything like that?
I think one of the aspects that we very quickly noticed was that these are mostly keyboard warriors. If you study the alt-right or, militia movements or neo-Nazi movements, the risk of actual violence and organized violence is much, much higher. With, these influencers, the Q people, very often it was just, they love to make up words about us. Like they would call groups of us with other journalists the Q-Man Centipede, or they made up a nickname for Travis, Tapwater Travis. So a lot of it for them is about posting and aesthetics, and even showing up to these events, which we went to many, many times now. I think the worst you're going to get is them saying, well, that wasn't very nice what you said about us on that episode, or actually we wouldn't, please don't attend or something like that. But the majority of QAnon people or followers of QAnon have an actual, interestingly, a non-pessimistic, an optimistic, I'd say, outlook on life, because they believe that actual justice is coming. So they don't have the frustrations of someone who, perceives the system as broken and maybe not serving them. They think, oh no, all this stuff is great. And also, maybe they've lost a lot of family members or friends because they were talking about this stuff too much. And so they're finally among people who understand them. And, I think that here and there's been influencers who wanted to capture gotcha content on us. But we haven't experienced anything that I would describe as, very dangerous. I think one time we went to a Save the Children rally, which was one of the rebrandings of QAnon, and it was in Los Angeles. And the security for the event were Proud Boys. Now, because it's not an open carry state, they were armed with knives, but the Proud Boys are much scarier to me than anybody who follows QAnon. I think what they're taught, the QAnon people, is to be meme warriors. They are fighting an information warfare. They are what they call digital soldiers, which was coined by Michael Flynn in one of his speeches. And so they perceive themselves that way. If you talk to them, they will tell you this is a nonviolent movement. They will go back home and they will go on YouTube and fantasize about the, executions of their enemies, but they always imagine it through an external force. So the military is going to do this, or Trump is going to take care of it. And I think there have been obviously outbreaks of violence among QAnon people, but they've often been people who were destabilized mentally or socioeconomically, and they don't necessarily represent what the majority of QAnon people would want to do. I would say that they are kind of in a unique position, even among far right belief groups.
You'd alluded to this before, but so much of what we hear about QAnon is these grand hypotheses about how things are going to happen, and then inevitably they don't happen. There was this idea that Trump's second term was going to be, when all of all of everything encompassed within the storm happens. You mentioned how Guantanamo is going to be expanded so that they can fill it with Democrats. How do people react when there's no payoff? Like there's no prophecy coming true, so why don't people just abandon it? And if I went to a fortune teller who just kept getting everything wrong, I'd stop going, right?
Yeah.
I mean, there's a lot of research. There's a really great book by a sociologist named Leon Festinger called "When Prophecy Fails" that explores this very question. And what people learn is that when people believe a prophecy, they've invested a lot in it, they really, really believe it, and that prophecy fails, they double down. And this happens over and over and over again. And so, I mean, one classic example is, there was a millenarian cult, which believed that Jesus would return in like 1849. And it didn't happen. There was a cult called the Millerites, and they turned into the Seventh-day Adventist Church, which has millions of followers today. So, just because there's a promise of a coming up, apocalypse, a promise of a coming golden age that is not fulfilled, that doesn't mean that the believers stop believing. They just believe that it's going to happen further in the future. It's just been delayed for some reason. This is just human nature, honestly.
And like what Julian said earlier, a lot of these folks have been isolated from family members, from their friends for believing in this. And so in a lot of ways, socially and community-wise, which I think we all strive to have for ourselves in this life, the only thing they have left are other QAnon believers. And it's difficult. It's difficult to go back to a family member that, barred you from coming to, Thanksgiving supper and saying, hey, I was wrong. That was really stupid. All the stuff that I was saying about JFK Jr. and the storm and all that stuff. I was wrong. And a lot of people don't realize that most family members would say, hey, great, awesome. Like, let's talk about it. That's great. But I think that there is an internal mechanism that keeps people from, like Julian was saying, when you've invested so much time into something, in this case, 4 years potentially.
Sunk cost fallacy.
Exactly. And what I will say is there were a handful of people, probably not as many, not as many as we would have liked to see, but after January 6th, who saw that, and that was kind of, it provided an off-ramp. January 6th, I think, was an off-ramp for a lot of QAnon believers, because here were people wearing the merch, believing in the same things that they do, causing violence to police officers, attacking the Capitol, being very unpatriot-like, and I think there were a few that did exit, but the people who stayed on dug deeper and splintered off into different sects of this QAnon movement, and
they simply blamed Antifa. They said, these
right.
are Antifa, these are the feds actually doing a false flag. So like we mentioned earlier, there's always a mechanism to process, digest, and continue on your journey.
We've just spoken here about why people continue to believe it once they've been exposed to it, but how is someone susceptible to believing in something like this? Because there are people listening to this right now who know someone who fell into that rabbit hole, who believe this stuff earnestly. And, I know that for myself, for those people, like, what we don't understand is how you get to the point where you can, I guess, fall for something like this.
Yeah, I mean, there are lots of predictors of conspiracist belief, and one of them is a feeling of powerlessness. If you feel like you have no agency over your life, you are more likely to believe that the results of your life are the consequence of like elite puppet masters controlling things behind the scenes. Another one is just isolation, feeling like, you don't, being unable to connect with anyone in like a healthy way. You're more likely to find like community in these conspiracist communities. And so the other one is just needing to feel like you're like a hero. I mean, this really connects to the powerlessness thing. People in the QAnon community really believe that they were part of a movement that would change the world in a revolutionary way, like really profound changes. And so that really motivated them to believe this nonsense.
Okay, so taking this stuff from the online into, government, the stuff that I cover, we've obviously got Republicans in office who believe in QAnon. Marjorie Taylor Greene subscribed to it. I'm certain that we'll have more after this next round of midterms in November. What does it say that these Republicans are subscribing to something so crazy?
I think that the GOP has had to contend with a part of their base believing in these things, and whether they've chosen to dog whistle to it or overtly support it is more of a question of tactics. We've seen someone like Joe Ray Perkins, for example, basically, have their comms team tell them, you need to knock it off with this extreme stuff. And for a little while, she shows some self-control around it. And then she makes a video going, you know what? I'm sick of it. I'm sick of being censored. Yeah. I'm going to just come out of the closet. You know what? I do believe in Q. What are you going to do about it? And so, there is that kind of interplay. But I think among the kind of GOP elite, they are, I think, as usual, with extreme beliefs, with militias, with far right belief systems, white supremacists, etc. They want to find that clever balance of we need the votes, and these people are galvanizing others, but this looks bad. But I think that's also eroding. I think that more and more it doesn't really matter, because some of these beliefs have been stripped of the label Q and have been kind of evaporated and absorbed into the general GOP belief system. So it's now very, very common to see satanic panic spread among the GOP, which, there's been a big resurgence in that. The claim that your opponents are pedophiles or are grooming, children or trafficking, etc. I think a lot of these talking points have migrated into the mainstream to such an extent that they no longer need to say, hey, this started with a Q drop, or this is why I came across it.
Do you think when I hear this stuff, the rationale that I give it, the explanation that I give it when I hear these Republicans accusing Democrats of being pedophiles or being groomers or something, is that it actually fits into the Republican mindset pretty neatly, in the sense that Republicans have long been leaning on these techniques to fearmonger, and they've been warning about, the entire white race being replaced by immigrants, obviously, just leaning on this emotional fear. And so I think that fits really neatly in, because if you just accuse someone of being a pedophile, obviously that's a major charge to lob at somebody else. And so it doesn't have to be true in the same way that, obviously Democrats aren't shipping in minority voters to replace white people in this country, but it kind of does fit back into that mindset of just raw emotional appeal in terms of just scaring older white voters who make up their base. I guess how do you reconcile that idea of just fear mongering with their actual belief in any of this stuff?
I think that the fear-mongering definitely is an electoral strategy. I think that, for example, the Federalist Society, the Koch brothers, and all of this dark money system is there to replace judges, is there to kind of do the infrastructural takeover that's necessary, whether it's taking over universities or seeding books or thinkers, kind of whole wings sometimes of academic theory are seeded by them. So the fear is really more of a galvanizing force that says, go out and vote, because they obviously are not happy with, constantly losing the popular vote and then winning through the electoral college. So they do want the semblance of legitimacy on the voting side of things. Of course, they would not stop at that. They don't, that's just essentially an aesthetic cover. And, if you look at, for example, the Brooks Brothers riot that Roger Stone was involved in, that made sure that the recount stopped in Florida and made sure that Bush was seated, these kind of dirty tactics that are on an institutional level or carried out by operators are possibly more crucial. But, it never hurts to look like more people voted for you. And so voter suppression and all of these other tactics are definitely on the table.
Brian, you brought up something, a point too, that I think is worth talking about. Narrative-wise, people who believe in QAnon, they like it better when the crime that you're accusing your opponent of can't be proven immediately. There's a reason that QAnon believers don't talk a lot about Jeffrey Epstein. They'll use the case of Jeffrey Epstein to say, well, because this is true, then Hillary Clinton and Bill Clinton are also doing the same. But the problem is with real crimes and real cases, eventually there will potentially be a trial. Eventually, somebody will get sentenced to a prison sentence, and then it's done. I think one of the most fun things for people who believe in the QAnon narrative is that it never ends. It's like an MMO. You can keep playing, and the goalposts can keep getting pushed down the line. And this very small time arrest is actually meaningless, because what it's really setting the world up for is a massive arrest that's going to shock the world. QAnon, people who believe in QAnon have this fantasy of all of their liberal friends coming to them, hat in hand, on their knees, saying, "I was so wrong. I was so wrong. Please forgive me. I see the light now." That is a huge element of the wish casting of QAnon, is this idea that liberals will see the error of their ways once the major arrests start happening, and finally that family member that said, no, you can't talk about this at the dinner table, or no, you can't come to this family gathering, goes, I was wrong and I am so sorry.
Yeah, which is what makes it so much harder for them to do the same, right? To say, what, QAnon stuff hasn't come true. I'm sorry. But a lot of the people who do, go through that process, they latch on to major movements among the GOP now. So they have a kind of fallback that still allows them to continue, carrying on the same political stance. Well, one other aspect I think of this that's important is to look at the religious aspect of things. The idea that the end times are here now, imminent, that the Antichrist has appeared. This has been happening forever, and millenarianism within Protestantism in the United States and within far right and just broad right wing movements has played an incredible role in galvanizing people to vote. And every 4 years, it's the same thing. Like, these are the end times, and you can save us. You can help. The process of defeating the Antichrist or whatever by voting, etc. And so I think that it's just around the corner. I mean, that's just another year down for them. It's always almost coming.
There's also this link to the Mike Pompeo evangelical wing of the Republican Party, who thinks that the rapture is imminent, and so that all of their support for Israel is predicated on that, on the ultimate destruction of the people of Israel for themselves. So yeah, it's that whole hole right there.
Yes, Israel's a wonderful landing pad.
Right.
We're like, we need to keep the landing pad in order, because when Christ returns, he's going to be landing there.
Yeah, the flames from the rockets might, burn a couple million Jews, but but we'll take a couple good ones with us.
Right.
You'll get to come.
So let's finish off with this. And you'd alluded to this point I'm going to make right here, but you've got this whole world of conspiracy theories that until recently existed only in these darkest corners of the internet. Obviously, we're now seeing a lot of this stuff manifest in real life, the political implications of it, or these far-right militias or whatnot. So it would seem like the belief in QAnon is just a small part of a larger problem of online radicalization. So I guess the question is, has there been any effective means of deprogramming people who believed in QAnon, and could those solutions be replicated on a broader scale?
Yeah, that's a huge question. I mean, that's really a mental health question. None of us are mental health professionals. I would say that that the only effective means of helping someone climb out the rabbit hole, it usually has to be done by family members, friends, someone who's really close to the individual. So that makes it really hard to reproduce on a big scale. But I mean, I would say that, there's the best thing you can do for someone is, invite them back, know that they won't be mocked or judged if they have a healthier media diet, if they approach reality in a healthier way. So, I mean, that's a really tough question. There are lots of people who are working that problem. I just don't think we as podcasters are quite equipped to solve it.
Well, I think your answer right there is pretty spot on. I would ask you guys, what's the best way, obviously, to hear more from you?
You can search for Qanon Anonymous on any podcast platform. And you can also, if you need links to listen or figure out how to do that, you can go to QAnonanonymous.com.
Jake, Julian, and Travis, thank you guys so much for taking the time. I really appreciate it. And hang in there. I know it's a weird thing that you guys do every day. So we appreciate the insight.
Our pleasure.
Thanks a lot, Brian.